everyone, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk with Greg and
Thomas.
yes. All right, folks. This week we have Stephanie Gallardo, who is running for Congress in Washington. And this week we are going to be having a discussion about immigration. Um, you know, it's something that hasn't really been brought up lately in the media, and I feel like we should be addressing this issue because even the person that was gonna campaign on being an immigration reformist is not following through.
Yeah.
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 So let's go ahead and have this discussion. All right, everyone, and let's give a warm welcome to the amazing Stephanie Gallardo. You are running for Congress in Washington. Yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us how your campaign's doing and what you're currently working on.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you both. Everybody, my name is Stephanie Gallardo. I'm a candidate for Congress in Washington's 9th Congressional District. I was born and raised here in Seattle, Washington. I come from a family of immigrants and refugees, educators, poets, all the good things. And I decided to run for Congress. It was March of last year when I saw so much happening in my community and also saw our representatives not rising to the occasion of representation. And my campaign has been doing extremely well, given that we are, challenging a 24-year incumbent who's backed by lots of corporations in the military industrial complex. We've been able to raise over $100,000, which is the most that any candidate has ever raised by this point in their campaign against my opponent. His name is Adam Smith. And, we're rocking and rolling. Greg knows that I've been dealing with various health issues. I just got over COVID literally like yesterday. And so this is the first day that I'm feeling good and feeling back at it.
Thank you again for joining us under those circumstances.
No. It's all good. I'm happy to be here because I'm finally feeling better. But yeah, I think, something that's important to mention is I'm a working class candidate, right? And so up until 2 months ago, I didn't have access to healthcare. And so now, since getting COVID and some other health issues that I've been having, I finally have been able to address them. And so it just really, shines a light on the fact that healthcare is so important in our communities and we absolutely need it to survive and thrive through these times. But yeah, that's a little bit about my campaign. I'm happy to tell you anything else that you want to.
Yeah. Thomas, do you have anything to ask?
Really, in terms of what sort of where you're from, what's going on right now, in terms of immigration or what is being, especially in this time of COVID, because I feel like I came as an immigrant myself. I came just prior to COVID kicking off. And for me, coming to this country, it was hard enough. And that's, a European white male. So that, I feel like even now, especially with COVID, I imagine it's going to be even worse.
Yeah, well, immigrants and refugees in our community are honestly going through so much. And just like you said, they are experiencing the pandemic almost, twofold compared to what other people are experiencing, because many of them, they can't work their typical job based on documentation and things like that.
Right.
But what I've seen lately related to our community of immigrants is, so in our district, we have the only immigrant detention center. It's very far to the south. It's in Tacoma, which is the furthest south in our district. And what we're seeing is an outbreak of COVID in the detention center. And of course, our representatives, at face value are trying to say that they're supporting the folks who are incarcerated to have access to healthcare and things like that. But in actuality, they're not doing the work to make sure that the immigrants are safe. And, safety, in my view, looks like no detention whatsoever.
Yes,
That's the thing that I keep, wondering from our representation is, what are they going to do to get these people out of detention?
Yeah, my problem, with this is Democrats who run on immigration reform, but people forget they profit off of holding these people in cages.
Right.
It's a business now. And so, yeah, of course, they're going to be just as bad as the Republicans. Of course,
Mhm.
Biden is being just as bad as Trump with immigration right now. He's continued, I believe, was Title 42, which kept them detained.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
And I wanted to get your thoughts on this, especially when he continued that Trump policy.
Mhm. Well, I think when the presidential primary was happening in 2020, we knew what Biden's immigration policies were. And when he finally put Kamala Harris on the ticket, people thought that she would push him left on a lot of different topics and issues. But the reality is that that hasn't happened at all. And immigrants and refugees have been saying since the get-go that Biden is not progressive enough in terms of his, policies related to immigration. And of course, he came from the Obama era, at least when he was vice president. And during the Obama era is when we saw the expansion of immigrant and detention centers. Really, they created the system that Trump was able to use and expand tenfold. To harm undocumented people, immigrants, and refugees of all kinds. And so it's no surprise to me that Biden is continuing these policies that were started in the Trump era, because really, when Trump started them, they were a continuation of the Obama era policies.
Yeah.
And so, it goes back to this understanding that the Democrats and the Republicans are one and the same. They're absolutely not out for the people. They're not gonna, stand for the people. They're standing for themselves and corporations. And like you mentioned earlier, Greg, incarcerating immigrants and refugees is a profitable business.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, I remember very vividly during the primary, Biden was confronted by immigration activists and basically held him to account and said, "Will you on day one stop all deportations as president?" And he literally said, "Go vote for Trump."
Right.
Because
Well,
he
not
literally
only
told him to go
that,
vote.
and not that was not the only time. There was I believe a group of people chanting 3 million deportations
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
audience.
Right.
And they had
Yeah.
to cut to commercial right away.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, if you remember, in Biden's first 100 days, he promised that there would be 0 deportations in the first 100 days of his presidency. And when we look back at the facts, there was tens upon tens of thousands, if not in the 100,000s, of people who were
He deported more people than Trump did in his first 100 days.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. And at the end of 2021, he had he made 150 deportation flights to Haiti. Right, it marked 150 deportation flights at the end. That was like coming to the end of the year of 2021. So like we need to, I don't know, I always feel like when you have, like, obviously with Republicans or people like Trump, like, you immigration rights or immigration justice only really becomes like a flagship issue when it's someone like Trump in office, or they appear to care. And then when you have someone like a Democrat or Biden, or it's no longer an issue anymore, or everyone feels like it's just somehow like gone away, like this doesn't exist anymore, and it clearly does, and it's causing so much harm and so much pain.
Sorry about that, y'all. That was Lil Cat.
No, mine's here too. She's sitting right on the. Oh my God.
There's a lot of support for abolishing ICE.
Okay.
My question was, if you were to be elected, how can you rally support for that if you do support abolishing ICE?
Okay. Yeah, well, as I mentioned earlier, my community is largely immigrant and refugee. In the state of Washington, we have the largest population of immigrants and refugees. And so I think, when we talk about abolishing ICE, that is something that folks in my community already want. Many of them have had negative experiences with immigration and customs enforcement, and understand that they are part of a larger system that is really hurting immigrants and refugees in our communities and nationally. So I think rallying support looks like, first and foremost, having multilingual conversations with people all across the district. So in our district, we have literally hundreds of languages spoken. And so often, folks, especially politicians who are wanting to talk with them, only do conversations in English. So what our campaign is trying to do, and what we're trying to raise money for, is getting interpreters, getting translators, so that we can begin conversations with folks to rally them to the side of abolishing ICE. And something I will mention is that a lot of people get really scared about this word abolish, right? I remember, one time I went to go door knock for a candidate who was running for city council here in Burien, which is right next to Seattle. And I was wearing, I don't remember what it was, like abolish something on my t-shirt. And a person came up to me and they were like, that word is bad. And I was like, is it? Tell me more about that. And so I think we have to really work with people and talk with people about what the word abolish actually means, and where the word abolish came from, and how imperative abolishing certain institutions and certain ways of being has been in United States history. So I think it's going to be obviously a big undertaking to engage in these multilingual conversations across the district, but folks are ready to feel safe in their communities. Folks are ready to not be torn apart and have family separations occurring in our district and things like that. So I think that it's going to be, like I said, a heavy lift, but also conversations people are ready for.
I agree. Thomas, go ahead.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think as from my experience as an immigrant coming to, I mean, I've had it probably the easiest out of most people coming to the United States as an immigrant. It's vastly different for people south of the border than it is from coming from Europe. But it took me 2 years to get a green card, and just the system that we have is just, it's so painful, and it's purposely made to be sufferable.
Right.
For example, I'll give you a clear example of what I went through. You have to submit things like birth certificates and stuff when you go through this immigration process. And I submitted my original birth certificate, and it took 2 months to get a reply. And then when they finally gave me a reply, they said it wasn't an authentic document. And so that stalled the process another 2 to 3 months, because every time they have an issue with a document, or they have an issue with something, it stalls the process for another month or 2 months.
Right.
And so I had to go and get another, I had to apply for a copy from my home country for another birth certificate, because they wanted it to be a certain size and a certain, this is the one I got given at birth, and yet that is not to that. And I know what it's purposely done, and they purposely make it this difficult.
Right.
And so if it's this difficult for someone coming from Europe, right, I can't even imagine the pain that must be occurring. They're making it so, when people say just come legally, I don't think they fully grasp how difficult it is to do it legally.
Yeah.
I don't actually,
And
for
also
people that,
how expensive that is. You
Right.
have to freaking pay to even get your birth certificate. You have to pay to get certain documents. How can people, god damn it, little cat, how can people expect people to do that if the whole process is not even affordable?
Yeah.
Right. And the very final stage is you have to go to a US embassy, right? Not all countries have a US embassy on site. So in South America, I'm sorry, I can't remember what country it is, but there's people who can't actually finalize the legal stage of their visa or their green card, because there's no embassy working in the country. which means you'll never ever be able to do it legally because there's no final stage of the process.
And
So you,
also, who can actually go and try? What if like the only embassy in that country is probably the same distance from like here to Chicago? You expect someone to travel that far to just get something finalized?
Yeah. My husband, as you both may know, my husband is an undocumented person, and we got married back in June 2020. He's been in the United States, I think like 10, maybe 12 years or something like that. And every single year he has reached out to different lawyers. He has gone to, different clinics to try and understand what his legal rights are, to move towards documentation. And he's been turned down every single place that he's gone and said that it's impossible. And so, when we've now been going through the process to get him towards documentation through our marriage, and it's been really difficult, extremely, extremely difficult. And, some people try to go through the immigration process without a lawyer, having reviewed the documents that need to be submitted. And I think it's impossible to do it without a lawyer. And a lawyer in and of itself is so expensive, incredibly expensive. And so there's just so many barriers at every single, point for people to try and become documented.
It's funny you should say that, because that is the exact experience that I had. In order to, we tried to do it initially without a lawyer, and there was so much paperwork. There was so much like legal jargon. There was like the whole process is made to feel completely overwhelming to the point where like it just destroys you like mentally.
Yeah, and lawyers. I'm sorry.
No, you're all right. Okay.
Oh, the audio lagged. I'm so sorry. I was just gonna say, and lawyers are just as stressful on its own.
Yeah. And so when people I've had this conversation with people here when they talk about, I just wish people just do this legally. And I'm like, you really don't understand how difficult it is to do this, to even for people who genuinely want to do it, because everyone wants to generally do it legally, but the reality is that it's just not possible. They've made it so difficult that it's just not possible.
Right.
Yeah. And going back to, how to, rally more support for abolishing ICE, I do agree. We need to definitely we definitely need to, be educating on, again, what that means by abolishing ICE. I'm pretty sure, most people can agree, there needs to be some form of security when it comes to, handling a country this size. But you also need to agree that people are human beings, and being inhumane and treating people like, not human beings is not border security. It's not security at all. It's genocide.
And what people don't understand is that America's foreign policy will directly inflect inwards. It will, what they're doing over the seas, or how they're treating people that aren't Americans, will come back to bite them. And it is here on US soil. It's hurting Americans. These policies are not just hurting immigrants and people who aren't Americans. It's an inflection, and it's coming back onto this soil also. So, like when I talk to people, like to allow an institution to have the power to literally go ahead and do hysterectomies on people without the consent, to have the power to be able to just unilaterally decide to cage someone for months on end without a hearing. Like these policies, you're by allowing this to take place, you are empowering these institutions to also bring this back home to you also. Not this isn't just a you versus them. It's like immigrant rights are human rights. They are everyone's rights are at stake, and that's what I need. That's what we need people to understand.
Well, I'm so sorry. I just need to add one more thing. People also need to understand that the leaders who support this and then go on and, you know, recognize Holocaust Remembrance Day,
Right.
fuck you. Because you're doing exactly what the Nazis are doing. And that is not a radical statement.
Right. Fascism is a multi-step process. Absolutely. Something that I was going to mention is that, one of the reasons that I decided to run for Congress is because the person who is my opponent, Adam Smith, he's the chair of the House Armed Services Committee. And so in his role, one of the main things that he does is, work with the military in terms of funding. He's definitely in conversations about what's going to be happening with regard to imperialist actions on the part of the US government. So he knows what's happening, right? He's contributing to the expansion of war across the globe. And here we are in the district in Washington state that has the most immigrants and refugees. So what I see is that he's actually contributing to creation of immigrants and refugees globally. And so that's one of the main reasons why I did decide to run for Congress, is because we absolutely cannot have a representative in this district that is creating these types of impacts globally. And, running himself as a progressive and then behind the scenes doing things that actually creates war and creates immigrants and refugees. And I feel like there is a conversation that we need to have in our district about what real politics looks like, because like I said earlier, he runs as a progressive, or he tries to pivot himself as a progressive. And the reality is that he's not. He's absolutely not. Yeah. You can't say in one frame that you are, for abortion rights, but then, on the back end of that, contributing to war, right? Like you can't have your cake and eat it too, if you know what I'm saying. If you get,
you gotta also remember all these issues, like a human rights issue is also a healthcare issue. It's also a climate issue, because as climate change begins to happen, as it progresses, it will create a global refugee crisis.
Yeah.
And so all these issues are tied together. Right. So to say you support one thing but don't another, then you don't really support that one thing in the first place.
Yeah, and that point exactly. That's why I talk about it's the way that America treats its immigrants or people abroad will inflect onto its own people. It will like what you're doing, what America does on foreign soil will be an inflection. And we've talked about this before about climate change, about how there will eventually, if not tackled, will cause almost like a climate refugee crisis. If this is the way America treats refugees currently, it's not looking good long term in terms of how climate refugees will be treated. I honestly look back at like Katrina and go, if this is how the American government responds to a disaster to its own people with what happened in Katrina, then we have a long way to go. Because
I also have to say this every time someone brings up Katrina. They're still dealing with the shit that happened today. Okay? I'm just putting that out there, because it needs to be said every time someone brings up Katrina.
Can I bring up one thing?
Yeah, go for it.
So, what you were saying sort of reminded me of this, I guess, infamous quote that Kamala Harris said maybe over a year ago. It was regarding the caravan of Central American immigrants trying to come into the Mexican border and then through the US. She said, go back, do not come.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? And I think that really characterizes the Biden administration's willful disdain for immigrants and the plight of immigrants in this country.
The fact that it also comes from a woman of color herself.
Yeah.
And that's the majority of these refugees. If not all, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So for her to be like, I am the first woman of color vice president, no, fuck you.
Right.
You know, so I'm glad that you made that point because people need to forget that, you know, our leaders aren't who they say they are.
Well, at the end of the day, they're protecting US capitalist interests. And if, you know, immigrants coming into our country who are undocumented creates some sort of tension point that could disrupt, you know, our capitalist gains, then what they're going to do is, you know, create the enemy, which in this case is immigrants and refugees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you bring that up, but yet people who are undocumented in this country are participating in capitalism by paying their taxes and going to work and yada yada yada. You know, you think they want that, but
that's another. Well, I mean, I know we're running out of time, but the reality as experiencing this here when I first landed here, I got Social Security faster than I did my green card. In fact, I got Social Security within a month, and my green card didn't actually arrive in my post box until 4 months into being here.
wow.
So the priorities are, you're right, the priorities are they're more than happy for you to pay taxes and do that first thing, but in terms of like identification and like just for
Mhm.
your own well-being, it's that's the back end of the issue.
Yeah. Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Of course.
Please come back anytime you want because you're always welcome.
You know, appreciate you both.
And go ahead and also shout out your social media, your website, and yeah, any way that people around the country can help you out.
Yeah, absolutely. So all my social media, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram are at.
Oh, girl, you're on the TikTok?
I'm on the TikTok. Go check me out. They're at Elect Gallardo, and my last name is spelled Gallardo. I always like to spell it because people get it wrong all the time. So yeah, go check me out, please. And my website is also electgallardo.com.
Yes, and their website is going to be in the description, so please check it out. And folks, thank you again for tuning in to another episode of Let's Talk with Greg and
Thomas.
woohoo, Thomas.
Thank
All
you
right,
both so
y'all.
much.
We'll see you next Monday.